Okay, to start, this kind of goes off of what we were speaking with about the EPA earlier, but with the issue of the wood stove bill that you're currently working on. Talk a little bit about that and what's going on there with the EPA as well.
Sure, the EPA is offering up or suggesting new wood burning air quality standards. We held a hearing on it. I ran legislation to do what I could do, and that was to challenge the DEQ, our own agency, to not get involved in this. And so my legislation pretty much challenges them not to go out and regulate these things. And we also sent off a resolution to Washington. But during the testimony in my committee, my Natural Resource Committee, we had manufacturers of boilers come in and talk to us. They were involved in a work group with the EPA. They were working towards some solutions. They thought they had reached them. And so when they left the last meeting they were involved in, they had come up with a number of 0.032 was the number they gave me as far as the emittance coming out of these stoves. That number, according to them, was about 90% more efficient and cleaner than what we currently use in some cases today. They thought that was a pretty good movement. And they got the way they did it was they used automobile technology with the catalytic converter stuff in the exhaust systems. They used those type of technologies which helped hold the cost down because the research has already been done on it. So they felt pretty good about that. Well then, all of a sudden, we're hearing from the EPA that they're proposing these air quality standards. You would think the number would be 0.032, yet we found out the EPA's numbers are 0.006, which, and I'm not a scientist to understand those numbers that well, but from those that I talk to that do, say 0.006 is just about pure. It's about as clean as you can possibly get. And which means in order to do it, you have to burn a certain type of wood, and it has to be absolutely dry. So the conditions to get there are virtually impossible. So you have to ask yourself, how did they go from this 0.032 to this 0.006? When I asked manufacturers, they said they had no idea because they were carved out of any further discussions. So my point is, who is the EPA talking to? Where are they getting their advice? Who's telling them and where are they getting their information to do these type of things? And yet they're out there proposing a rule that if the administration doesn't object to it, it will take the weight of law, and it will, I believe, cripple that industry in our region of the country. And too many people have relied on these things, and especially doing this a year after we just came off one of the worst winters in our recent history up here, where people actually relied on those wood stoves to get through the winter. I'm still baffled how they can do it, but that's another symptom of where they seem to want to go, and they're going right around we the people, and they're coming up with this stuff. And now we found out through testimony we don't even know who they're talking to. They're just arbitrarily coming up with these numbers because clearly the manufacturers are willing to work with them, and then they got carved out.
I guess it's a big concern, especially to all of us, because we got residents that we all represent that are probably very much living on $800 and less a month. And I know so many people in my district that I share with Tom that that's how they heat their homes. And to be able to take a look at them to burn propane or any other type of fuel is just out of the question for a lot of people. So it's a survival issue.
One of the things we had to do last year during that the heating crisis, was get the DNR to allow permits for folks to go into the woods and cut firewood themselves off of state land. Now, if you're cutting the wood and burning it right away in that kind of situation, it is impossible to meet these standards because there's no time for the wood to cure. And so it's just very much, it seems, you know, to all of us, some idea of somebody in Washington who lives in a different climate, doesn't know anything about the heating needs or the culture or even how many trees we have available in our area, and they pass a rule that, like Tom said, becomes all the force of law.
And where does it stop? Does it stop with campfires?
Yeah.
Charcoal grills? I mean, where do we stop? This is,
and where's
my
the harm?
opinion,
And
foolishness.
And what evidence do they bring forward to prove that they need to change these emission standards of the wood stoves? That's the other troubling thing.
Well, John brings up the key point, because where does it stop? We've been told the standard they propose for these wood boilers could not be met by your typical campfire out camping with your family, and it cannot be met with a typical fire in your fireplace in your home. So if it's that critical, which I don't believe it is, based on what they're telling us, but if it is, if the EPA is right, then I don't see how they can stop. because they, in their mind, have to save the planet. So if they're going to save the planet by eliminating the wood boilers, and that's the standard that must be met, then how can they allow you or I to go out to the campsites and have our campfires? Because it's emitting the same problem, according to them. But what I see happening is, if they came out publicly and suggested that, there would be such an outcry from the public, they would be in trouble. So what they do is they do a subtle move here with these wood boilers, because do they smoke? Yes, they do. I have one. So I understand they can smoke, but they use something like that as their tool. But again, where does it stop?
Outlaw lightning. Mother Nature burns more wood than people do every year. So
does it just specify wood stoves? It doesn't necessarily say anything about leading onto campfires, but you see it leading to that. Okay. We were also speaking about the addition of wolves being added back or to the endangered species list. What are your thoughts on that?
Outrageous. I just think it's absolutely outrageous, and it continues to show the very selfish drive of some groups, especially Humane Society of the United States, to say they know how our wildlife should look, and they know how the Upper Peninsula and Wisconsin and Minnesota, they know how it should look around here, and they know what's best. And the rest of us and our DNR and all the work that we've done, that's not worth anything because they want to do it. And we sat on committee together and had countless people come up in front and say, we think you should have wolves in the UP. We're not from there, but we like to visit, and we want there to be these wolves there. We want to see them. And it's like, well, those of us who live there are fine with living with them too, but you have to give us the power to manage these. The population is far beyond the recovered goals ever stated, and we're seeing those impacts. It's impacting our tourism, it's impacting our wildlife, it's impacting our businesses, especially in agriculture. And these impacts cannot just be ignored because some groups from out of state decide they know better how the wildlife in the UP should look. And it makes me very angry that they're judge shopping, some judge in Washington, D.C., who thinks she knows how the UP should be done. And when you read some of these briefs and you see, well, what's the suffering that they're experiencing that motivated this lawsuit? Well, they can't hear the wolves howling anymore. They're not getting an opportunity to see their favorite wolf on their trail cam anymore. Whereas those of us who are living with these and have cows and livestock, what about our pain? What about the suffering of the little boy in Manistee who walked on the wolves eating his dog? You know, these are real impacts. These are real suffering that's going on. And all we've been asking for is for the ability to manage them, not to eliminate them. Just let us manage them like we manage the other wildlife. And I think we're doing a good job. We see wildlife all across the state making dramatic comebacks, whether it's fish, birds, or large animals. It's going well. The wolves have been recovering. Let us manage them. And it's just very insulting to constantly be battling this again and again. And I can't wait for us to either win the appeal or for Congress to act and just do what they did in Montana and Idaho and just take them off by legislation. But we need to move forward with this and win this case.
And there's, you know, when you look at the number, 700 and some wolves, that doesn't sound like a lot when you consider the whole UP, but people need to remember the concentration is in 3 very specific regions, and those populations in those regions have grown at about 13% annually in those specific regions. It's unsustainable. When they start running out of their natural food, that's when they start going to cows and dogs and cats and those types of things. So, you know, you can't just look and say, boy, Michigan's only got 700. It's not a big deal. No, it's those specific reasons. And the Humane Society of the United States that is pushing this is not to be confused with your local, you know, humane societies or animal shelters. This is a special interest group whose motivation is not protecting the wolf. Its motivation is to cease all hunting, all fishing, and eventually
animal agriculture,
domesticated pets.
Yes.
I mean,
it's their stated goals.
Yeah.
And you can see when you check their financials, I'm sorry to interrupt you,
No,
John.
go ahead.
But less than 1% of the money that they're raising, and people see their ads all over television and in the media, less than 1% of it goes to help a single dog shelter or cat shelter or rescue an animal from a hurricane like they put in their commercials, 99% is either going to salaries and pension benefits for their lobbying groups or their lawyers. And they make out like they care all this about the animals when they're really pushing their agenda through these ways of, well, we're just after the wolves for right now. But it's so disgusting what's going on for those of us who have to live here and want to continue to live here. We had one woman from this group come to us in committee and said, you folks just need to adapt or move away.
That's right.
You know, get out of the UP. That's an important habitat for the wolves. And I refuse to accept that. And it just makes me very angry.
Someone in committee also told us that if we're worried about our children, just don't let them play outside.
Yeah.
That was the answer. So.
Well, I guess, you know, it's too bad that we spend so much time on this issue. I thought that it would have been put to rest by now, because as I always say, I'm more worried about the two-legged wolves knocking on people's doors in the Upper Peninsula because of late due notices on their utilities and people that are struggling looking for a job.
Yeah.
And that's, you know, it's too bad that we have to spend so much time and effort on it when there's so many other bigger issues.
You know, they made a big issue, those that did not want the hunt, about our scientific evidence. Where's our evidence? I would submit to the folks, and we're going to do everything we can to make sure they see exactly what was in those affidavits and what they told this judge, because it's the most ludicrous stuff I've ever heard in my life, and there is no science in this at all. It is all pure, raw emotion, and it was almost fictitious, made up to make a point. But what's even sadder is that there's a judge that listened to this stuff and ruled the way they did. But I want the public to hear, and I will do everything in my power to make sure they know exactly what these people were saying, so we understand and get a grasp of what we're dealing with. Because as much as they made the issue about science, this had nothing to do with science, and yet they were the ones that made the issue. So it shows the hypocrisy, it shows how desperate they are, and it gets to the heart of all the things we're dealing with when it comes to natural resources in our region. And if they're not managed appropriately, whether it be wetlands or the wolf, our way of sustaining our lives could be at jeopardy here. That's what's at stake.
So what happens next then? What do you do?
Well, right now the Department of Natural Resources in Michigan, the Attorney General, they're considering whether or not how to be involved with the appeal or not. Of course, Fish and Wildlife could appeal themselves at the federal level. So there's, you know, a lot of balls to drop yet to figure out exactly what the next step will be.
I know there's coordination right now between our director of Michigan, director of Wisconsin, director of Minnesota. I did talk to the director on Friday, and he informed me that he's communicating with them. I don't know what their next move would be, but they are talking together as three states that should probably approach this together, because they're being targeted together.
The simplest answer is, like I said earlier, to do what they did for Montana and Idaho and simply have Congress and the President act to remove the wolves from the list and take it out of the realm of the courts, and we can all move on, like Scott said, to issues that, you know, we need the jobs, we need work, we need to deal with the energy issues up here. There's a lot of other very important things going on too that could use a lot of our time as well.